Hello, it's Buzzy Fuzz. This will be my first post on here. But without wasting time, let's talk about Jeep 4-liter inline 6, specifically the XJ. Most all models. The one that we're in today is a 99, and all of the stuff on the internet that I have found, there is probably 2% of people that are giving the right information from a technical standpoint out of everyone. And when I say that, I say it because I've been through, I mean, I can't say it all, but it has to be, I must have been through most of it, from forums to Facebooks to Instagrams to everything, locals, whatever. My background is very technical, and basically, had to let the motorcycle guy go. Basically, I started out working on cars for quite a few years. I went to technical school for a few years. I was a boat mechanic. I have diesel technology, all kinds of stuff, SAE, 4-gas analyze. Most of my years, I have been in a smaller engine shop. I call it Big Boy Toys. We're talking personal watercraft, ATVs, UTVs, dirt bikes, snowmobiles, a lot. We're talking 25 plus years. And so I'm retired now, but I do a lot of hunting. I've done a lot of hunting my whole life. A lot of off-road, a lot of different vehicles. I am not a Jeep lover. This XJ doesn't allow me to love Jeeps either. I'm trying hard, new or old. I do like old ones to a point, but the cooling system issues everyone has were not an issue when the machinery was new, or within 10 or even 15, let's say even 20 years. It wasn't like that from the factory. Every issue everyone's having has to do with broken down parts, worn out parts, leaks, and maybe even dealing with modifications. Some other person thought they knew what they were doing, so on and so forth. Let's talk about it. The Jeep I'm in came with long arm suspension, off-road, mostly rock crawling stuff, but it has the I believe 3 or 4 core cooler or radiator I should call. It had 2 giant electric fans, new hoses, all kinds of new stuff, very well taken care of, very well easily modified. Somebody spent a lot of time and effort on it. I picked it up from him because he just didn't want to do anything else in it. So when we talk about the cooling system, let's rule out the engine and the head gasket. If you have a head gasket gone bad, there are scenarios where you don't know until maybe high RPMs, high cylinder pressure, things like that. Cylinder head gasket leaking means it's the coolant will run into the cylinder where the power is made, or vice versa. Most of the time the combustion chamber is losing all of its hot combustion into the cooling system. That being said, this talk's not about that. It's very easy to figure that out technically. You can find people talking about that. Cylinder leak down tests, cooling pressure tests, things like that. This is basically a speech about everything else. Let's start with the radiator. If it's dirty, if it has smashed fins, or you notice a leak from somewhere up in the front area from the radiator area, 9 times out of 10 the radiator needs replaced, especially if it's the stock one. Look how old it is and what it's been through, the flex, the non-solid frame on these things. Listen, a good 3 or 4 core radiator that fits in this area is great, aluminum especially. Well, pressure testing's a big deal. Do it. It will show you where the leak is. Learn how to do it. Test the cap. The radiator cap needs tested. Period. If the rubber gaskets on it are bad, junk it. Get the right cap. Don't listen to people about, oh, get this pressure, that pressure, let's raise it up. None of that. Go with what it's supposed to have. It's a 1-to-1. I don't know what the pressure is off the top of my head. We could talk about it where I could show you the actual specifications on it right here. Now, hoses. Crusty, old, not spongy, or overly spongy, like they feel soaked with water. Go to your parts store, feel a brand new hose, ask them to feel one. Feel one. If it doesn't feel like that, when the engine's cold, not under pressure, replace them, both of them. The overflow hose from the radiator to the overflow bottle. It must be good. Some leaks come from that. You think it's leaking, you can't find the leak, it's because that's leaking. When the engine gets hot, it pushes excess coolant into the overflow bottle. When the engine cools off, if everything is working properly in the bottle, the hose must go down into the bottom of the bottle so that when it cools down, the little valve in the cap could bring all of the coolant back in as the radiator cools because of the low pressure it has created. Now, that out of the way, I've gone through cooling issues on this XJ in the weirdest ways. I can drive all over town for hours and hours and miles, stop and go and stop and go, never overheat, ever. I can climb a hill hunting, go up like we are doing right now, up the face of the mountains, get to the top, go down the back, come back, do the same exact thing, the same exact day, and it overheats. Doesn't make much sense. Overheating doesn't. There are a lot of things that come into play. RPM, as per how fast you're going, or miles per hour, or heat of the day. Hot, overheat, cool in the morning, not overheat, those types of things. This radiator that is on here, like most aftermarket radiators, especially the cheaper Chinese ones, they come with a complete aluminum plate that they call a shroud with holes in it where the fans are mounted. 4 fans, 2 fans, 3 fans, whatever. This one had 2 big fans. Note, those electric fans, look them up. If they don't have information on them, or you can't find any, junk them. If you want electric fans, buy the really good, expensive electric fans that flow a lot. The problem is, the highest flowing electric fan is only about 2,000 CFM. That's cubic feet per minute. That's how much air it pulls through the radiator. Pulls. Not blows, pulls. The stock XJ has an electric fan, most of them. Earlier years may or may not, or if you don't have an air conditioner, sorry, it may or may not. The fans on this, like a lot of them, especially if you buy the radiator with fan kit for $200 or $300, which is pretty cheap, you need to question it. Do a flow rate test, or have someone do it. It's going to cost you money and time, but I'm telling you, the highest flowing electric fan for this size of radiator is not going to be more than about 2,000 or 3,000 CFM. That doesn't do any good. The shroud on the back of the radiator that covers the whole thing except for the fans, that creates an issue. So when you do start getting hot, not overheating, or overheating, hot, either way, let's say you come up over the top of the giant hill you climbed, you're on the road, you're doing 40, 50, 60, whatever it is, it gets hot, or it starts overheating. Let's go down the other side of the mountain, either in neutral, safely, or in drive, but let's coast with not much throttle. That way the wind can come through the radiator and cool it off as you're going downhill. Well, that's with stock. That's the way cars are set up from the factory. Most of them, even to this day. With that big radiator shroud that's blocking everything off except for the fans, guess what you don't get? You don't get any wind blowing through the radiator, helping cool it off at high speeds. Why? Because the electric fans are not allowing as much air through as the speed that you're going, if that makes sense. Even if they're on. When they're on, they're actually blocking more air because they're not allowing the fast air to come through because they are acting as a cover or a buffer. Okay?
You wanted to be held down. Now you're the one who's holding me back. I wonder if you notice, baby, we've gone a little off track. Going up and then
So, it's very important to not block off the whole radiator except for where the electric fans are. Saying that, that means electric fans do need shrouds. And just like the mechanical viscous clutch belt-driven fans that these all came with for the main cooling, those have to have the proper shroud also. All cars do. Whether it's a hot rod or whatever. These cars and these hot rods you see with the big fan spinning with no radiator shroud, those overheat all the time. If you're around them long enough, you'll see. So basically, when we also talk about the rest of the cooling system, the thermostat housing, the water pump. There's a lot of gimmicky water pumps out there. The high flow, closed vein, impeller style systems that are still the same price, if not less, than the stock water pump. That water pump is okay, but if you're doing high RPMs all the time, you're in first gear, climbing 4 low, those cavitate, and cavitation creates erosion on the impeller blades, and it happens to anything. Look up propellers on boats. Boats are the same. Cavitation, one little dent or one little problem with a boat propeller You continue to run it, eventually you'll start seeing scars and boil marks, and then eventually the propeller will start coming apart because of cavitation. That means it's creating air bubbles instead of moving or flowing, and those air bubbles are actually boiling the water in those minuscule little bubble areas on the impellers, or the propellers, in the aspect of the boat propeller. Same idea. Cavitating means not flowing. It means it's spinning in there and not pushing. They're great for low-speed applications. I'm not knocking them for everything, but like I said, keep this in mind as we go through this. These machines did really well and came out of the factory and worked for decades with no cooling issues. Maybe a few if you're towing, or certain little ones, but they would not boil over and create all these issues everybody's complaining about having. So, move from the water pump, considering it's good. It's not leaking from the little weep hole. The little weep hole can leak. It leaks in drips, and it runs down, and guess where it runs down? It runs down that lower radiator hose. People always think, oh, the radiator hose is leaking, I gotta keep tightening that clamp. It's not usually that. Number one, if it's leaking, change it, along with the clamps. Number two, it's not usually the hose or the clamps, it's the water pump above it, and that is the trail that it takes to show you a leak. If the weep hole's leaking, that means the seals are bad, the bearing's about to go. Follow it up internally, through, and back out, and that's the thermostat and the housing. Buy the thermostat housing that's high flow. Buy the thermostat that's high flow. Doesn't matter. If you don't take care of the simple issues that makes a cooling system work, all that crap doesn't matter. You don't need a high flow thermostat housing, and you don't need a high flow thermostat unless you're doing specific things. You're always in the summer, you're high RPMs, you're climbing and rock crawling, and you're really in the nastiest things. Fine. Most of those guys don't even run thermostats. Why? Because they're always in the summer, they're always doing gnarly crap, and that's a whole different story. We're talking about a daily driver and an off-road four-wheel drive. That's where we're at today, okay? So, high performance is another talk. This is regular performance. So, people are all over saying, oh, put the lower temperature thermostat in there. Don't run the 195 that the factory calls for and that's in there. Let's put the 180, the 175, the 185, whatever. People, thermostats do not create the temperature the cooling system runs at. I'm sorry. What keeps cooling systems from boiling over is everything working properly, but most specifically, being under pressure. Water under pressure, it doesn't boil, or it doesn't boil as soon as not being under pressure. We'll leave it that way. We can dive into BMW and some German cars that don't have pressurized, but that's a different story. The thermostat and the engine should work together, especially fuel injected. Fuel injection brain boxes, even older, they look at the coolant temperature, they look at the outside temperature, they look at the airflow, they look at all these things, and all of that factors into fuel mileage. So, hello? Anyway, if you're running too cold, your fuel injection is completely confused, and it's probably in the closed loop or over fuel, which now makes your exhaust weird, clogs up your cat, then you get O2 sensor readings, you get all kinds of weird stuff. These are made to start opening. Thermostats start opening at the temperature that is stamped on them. A 195 begins to open at 195. When it's open, it doesn't know or care what temperature it's running at. It just knows it's above 195 and it is open. You can check these things by an old coffee can and a torch with a like a cooking thermometer in the water. You can check your thermostat by boiling the water and watching the temperature on that thermostat in the water, and as it gets to the temperature that your thermostat's supposed to open, you need to visually look and see that, oh look, my water is at 195, it's on its way up, and my thermostat is not opening. It's bad. Okay? Buy a new one. Don't go to the junkyard. You guys buying crap from the junkyard like, oh, I got a water pump. No, get new stuff, especially if you're having issues with your cooling. Why buy used? Don't. Thermostat's open. Everything is flowing. Everything we've talked about is all good. Okay? So, all of those parameters coming together makes for it to work perfectly. Now let's talk about the coolant itself in this scenario. Depending on where in the world or the country you live in areas that get down to a specific temperature on an average every year. Not hot, I'm talking freezing. The coolant, 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, whatever you think you need, consult with any sort of paperwork or real-time stuff that tells you when the antifreeze begins to turn into slush. Okay? 50-50, there are specifications. That tell you when 50-50 antifreeze begins to slush and freeze. Because it will, to a point. It'll be like liquor. It won't freeze solid, but it can. Look at the North Slope in Alaska. Look at all the Norwegian country. All this stuff. A lot of those places will run straight antifreeze with a little bit of water, or vice versa. But you need to consult a graph, usually on the back of a coolant bottle, or even online. We all have these little smart things here that we can look up stuff right away. 50-50 has a specific range. I think it begins to slush or doesn't do its job at like negative 10 or something like that. We'll look. But that coolant, if you live in an area where it never freezes and it never even gets close to freezing, you don't even need coolant. I mean, you should run a little bit because it does have some anti-rust properties and things like that in it, supposedly. Some do, some don't. That help the block's iron in this case. That stuff is nice. It helps with a little bit of lubricity, a little bit. But you don't even have to have coolant. Coolant is for freezing, as far as antifreeze. So, make sure your antifreeze and water mixture is exactly what it's supposed to be for your area. The more water, the better the cooling. I will throw that at you. Everybody will, not everybody, but a lot of people will disagree, but physics, mechanical engineering, look it all up. Now, flushing. I see it on the internet. Should I flush? Did I flush? Did I flush right? Did I flush the radiator? Did I flush the engine? What's this little cap on my heater hoses? Look up flushing properly. Either put a T-fitting in your coolant or your heater hoses like they used to do and run the garden hose and do the whole process. Or figure out how to do it by pulling a radiator hose and doing the same idea. There are many different ways to skin this cat. Okay? Flushing, important. Look at what's being flushed. Are there giant chunks of crap? Maybe there are issues. Maybe the block's got a lot of stuff internally that flushing isn't going to help, or many flushes should help. If it does have a bunch of crap floating around, think about the orifice sizes in the radiator. The radiator orifice sizes. Look at how the radiator works. There are not giant tubes running through there. There are little teeny tiny flat elongated tubes that are not even an eighth of an inch in most scenarios, that are flowing the water back and forth with the fins connected in between. Fins are important. Don't pressure wash your radiator. Use soft, low flow water. Flow it with low flowing, soft water through the back of the radiator to the front. If you push all of that crap from the front through the back, it's going to stick rocks and mud and stuff in there that will never come out. If you need to flush the fins of the radiator, flush from the back to the front, very soft garden hose. Takes a long time. Do it properly. If you skip any steps or you rush through it, none of this makes a difference. Just go waste your time. Anyway, basically, flushing. Inspect the stuff that comes out. If there are giant chunks of rust, your radiator's plugged internally, almost guaranteed. If it's not plugged solid, it's plugged just enough that it's not going to cool right in these scenarios we're talking about. Okay? I'm going to move up the trail here. We'll talk a little bit more.
Tank, try to forget yesterday. The weather's hot, the beer's ice cold. Tie that tube up to that boat. Pack the Yeti, rally up your friends, find some water, jump on in. Then let's go and play. Soak that sun up on that lake. Feeling good on a Sunday. Time to party, feeling good on a Sunday fun day. Raise your cup, leave your worries behind. Recharge your soul and forget about life for a while. Let the chips fall forward and hey, we're feeling good on a Sunday fun day. Yes, Sunday fun day.
All of these things in conjunction all have to be perfect. So let's think about this if it were a train with 10 cars. Well, that train can only tow all those cars perfectly as long as each car is coupled together. So if there's one car that's got a bad coupler and it keeps coming off, it doesn't work, right? All the couplers, all the cars, everything in this scenario has to be working properly. There can't be one thing wrong or else the train comes apart. Does that make sense? So, this brings me to all of the things that I did in a slow manner. I do daily drive it, but it's not my only daily driver, so I went through this cooling system one by one by one by one. I studied book by book by book, manual by manual, and that's when I came across all of this stuff on the internet. Like I said, that's like mostly all false, or mostly has a lot of truths, but mostly false. Because what one guy does doesn't mean that it's going to fix your problem. That's just how it is with everything, right? You have an argument with your wife, or your girlfriend, or your kid. What your friend did to fix that problem with his family is not necessarily what's going to happen with yours. A lot of analogies. Anyway, so I went through this cooling system start to finish. And I monitored the fans, I monitored the coolant, I flushed it like literally 5 times. Mostly because I didn't like the coolant style that was in there. I'm an old school guy, I like the old school coolant rather than the new stuff. But I worked my way through all of this. And then mechanically, I went to the thermostat in the housing first. I did all the stuff. The thermostat wasn't necessarily bad, but it wasn't broken, but it was not opening at the proper temperature. Cleaned all of the surfaces, made sure the housing wasn't cracked or leaking, and it all began from there. And each time I did something, of course, I had to drain the coolant and do it again. So each time I was flushing, per se. So that doesn't hurt either, other than if you don't have a lot of money to buy overpriced coolant. I understand that. But I did all the steps and all the things pretty much that we talked about. And then I went to some professional information and forums and even 1 or 2 YouTube sites that I found. I had to scour through a lot of stuff because they weren't YouTube channels that taught stuff. They were more of people that got a lot of heavy use out of these type of vehicles or with these cooling systems / engines in a broad array of scenarios that their cooling system had to work well because of what they did. I took those little pieces and parts over all these months of this summer and put them all together and decided what I was going to do. If you look at the rating of the stock coolant fan that comes on these machines, the mechanical fan that's bolted to the pulley in front of the right side or passenger side of the radiator with the shroud, a specific shroud, that stock fan, whether it's a newer one with a lot of blades, it's plastic, or the original fan with I believe it's 5 or 6 with the metal blades. Those fans move at or more, depending on which blade set you have, 9,000 CFM. Now, do you remember what I told you the best electric fan does for this size of radiator? I'm not talking about a high-performance drag racing V8 huge radiator electric fan that you can buy up to 9,000 CFM, because those don't work on these radiators. These radiators are too small. They don't make a fan like that for these. If they do, tell me the brand, style, and where to get it in the comments, please. Because I would be interested. I'd like to look at them. But I took the shrouds off this radiator, the aluminum shrouds, which is blocking the whole radiator off, except for the 12-inch Chinese 2000 CFM fans. Took the shrouds off. I customized them. I took the whole radiator core mount, top, the whole thing off. I replaced the water pump with the OEM water pump. Replace the belt. If you're doing that crap, replace the belt. You're already in there. Don't, like I said, don't not fix something that you're removing and putting back on. Okay? Especially if you inspect it the proper way and notice it's cracked, dry, or even a squealing scenario. I bought a brand new OEM pump, or OEM style, but with good ratings. An OEM metal, a 5 or 6 blade fan. The OEM mechanical fan shroud and the OEM viscous fan clutch that is to be mounted on there, because it needs that. That senses temperature and allows the fan to freewheel or free spool or pull a lot of air. That goes right along with what we talked about earlier of going down a hill in drive or neutral and allowing that air to come through if you're hot or overheating. That air coming through from you cruising down fast is going to be better than any air the fan pulls through in that hot or overheating scenario. I took the crap off, if you will, of this aluminum radiator. I modified the aluminum shroud, which I'm going to call a block off. It literally was blocking off, if you do the math, it was blocking off 1/3 of the airflow through this radiator. That doesn't work, not for me. Why would I have this big of a radiator if I'm going to block 1/3 of it off, right? I got the original plastic shroud for the original radiator fan, for the electric fan, not the mechanical one. Customize it to fit on the core mounts with this aftermarket electric fan that the radiator did come with. One of these crappy ones that only moves a little bit. I left it on there because this radiator and cooling system doesn't need an electric fan on all the time. This one I do have hardwired with the relay system properly to be running always. I just don't want to screw with it. The mechanical fan OEM with OEM fan shroud. This is my second shakedown on about a 20-mile loop near my house of a lot of straight up, straight down. We're talking anything from 10 degrees, an 8 degree at 60 miles an hour, up a hill that's 8 miles long at 10% grade. The other side of it's 8% and it's only about 2 miles long. And then the route I'm on now, which is 8, it's got flat spots at the bottom, but as I get towards the ski area here, I get up to anywhere around some spots 25 to 35%, depending on what route I take and what shortcuts. Slow speed, first gear, 4 low, 4 high, 2 high, slow speed. Every scenario that I wrote down and remembered when this overheated before. And like I said, sometimes it didn't overheat doing the same exact thing. That was the weird part. I have done now every single thing that I have done in the days I acquired this vehicle when it overheated. No overheating. As a matter of fact, now when this is running hot, it might be a tick or two, and I don't mean a tick on the gauge, but I mean like a needle tick, above 210, which 210 is the running temperature on this, if you know what I was saying earlier. So, I'm going to tell you right now, if you got all these issues, and you got a hornet in the back window here that you need to let out, anyway, sorry about that. Go piece by piece, like we've talked about. Go piece by piece. Don't just replace them. Everybody in these forums and online and YouTube and the Facebook. Sorry about that. Don't just replace them, inspect them. Don't throw parts of stuff. That's one of the first things you learn when you go and you learn how to work on things, whether you grow up in the farm or your parents or your dad or your uncle or whatever the scenario is, and you're really good at fixing stuff. The first thing you learn is we don't just go buy a bunch of new crap and throw it on. We got to figure out what the problem is. You can buy it all. It doesn't matter. If it gets rid of the problem, that's great. But what was the problem? Now you have fixed the problem, but you can't share it with me. You see? So, the electric upgraded fan that I left on, the customized mounts, and the OEM shrouds with the OEM water pump and the OEM metal mechanical fan with the viscous fan clutch. Everything is back to the way these vehicles came from the factory, not overheating and working properly. Thank you for watching this, my first video. This channel actually used to be something different for quite a few years, but I've switched it over. Like I said, it's going to be hunting excursions, it's going to be four-wheeling, it's going to be camping, it's going to be just random stuff. It won't all be teaching like this. But I am so frustrated, like I said at the beginning, with all the crap out there. I just wanted to throw the real knowledge out there along with the other real knowledge that you need to really dig into to find. Okay? I try to be as layman as I can on this for everyone. And I hope this helps. Because I'm telling you right now, 9 times out of 10, if it's not a bad thermostat, and if it's not a bunch of crap in the radiator and the fluid, and it's not a leak from many of the parts we talked about, 9 times out of 10, it's the cooling fan / fan shroud. Okay? Go ahead and share the channel if you want. And if you like it, go ahead and click all that crap and whatever everybody says. I'm kind of old school, so I'm not going to copy everybody else, but hit all those buttons and follow along. I can't guarantee I'll have stuff every week, but I will have stuff. So, thank you. Stay tuned. Take all of this to account. Do it step by step. And let me know in the comments anything you're thinking about after hearing this. I will respond to everything that I can. Have a good day. I'm going to finish this awesome route, get home, pick up my kid from work, and hang out with my lovely wife and Buzzy Fuzz, signing out.